I'm Jim Ludes, and this is the second podcast in the Pell Center series. Today with G. Wayne Miller, our friend and colleague. He's the director of the Story in the Public Square project here at the Pell Center. And he is an accomplished author, in addition to his day job as a staff reporter at the Providence Journal. His latest book is Car Crazy, the battle for supremacy between Ford and Olds and the dawn of the automobile age. Wayne, thanks for being here.
Jim, thank you for having me.
Tell us about the book. Where did the idea come from? Why did you write it?
Well, the roots of this go back to a book I wrote a number of years ago, Men in Speed. I spent a year on the NASCAR top circuit, the Winston Cup circuit. It was called at that time. It's the Sprint Cup circuit currently. And I wasn't intrigued so much about automobile racing as people who took great risks. And so I spent a year embedded in a top team, and during that time, or shortly thereafter, heard about this crazy race in 1905. 1905 from Manhattan to Portland, Oregon, in 1905 automobiles, which I thought was just, A, I didn't think really there were many automobiles around, and B, it's like, seriously, how can you, how can you drive from Manhattan to Albany, let alone all the way across the continent? But in fact, it happened, and it was a race, and it took 45 days to go, and out of that concept grew a larger concept, which was, let's take a look at the entire birth of the automobile industry, and that was happening in 1905.
And so what did you learn that just surprised you in writing this book?
I was surprised by many things. First and foremost, by the sheer number of automobile manufacturers there were in that early
More
period.
than just the big three.
It wasn't the big three. It was the tiny 500 plus. The period I write about mainly is from 1893, when the first American automobile was produced and sold, to about 1908, when Henry Ford's Model T came on the market. And I go a little bit after that. But there were hundreds of automobile manufacturers at that time. Most were small. Many had been carriage makers. Some were sewing machine makers. Some were people who just tinkered literally in their garage. There's sort of a parallel here between that era and the late 70s and through the 80s in terms of computers and the digital world, and Steve Jobs, the famous story, starting his company Apple in a garage. Literally.
Yeah. Well, and one of the benefits of that many competitors in a marketplace is innovation.
Exactly.
And there was a tremendous amount of variation. And you look at some of the images in the book, and we're down the street here from the Audrain Automobile Museum.
The great museum, yeah.
Some of the stuff that they have is tremendous, but I mean, even steering mechanisms were wasn't just the classic wheel that we know today.
No, the early steering mechanism was a tiller. It wasn't, in fact, even a wheel. These two automobiles that I talked about racing from New York to Portland, Oregon in 1905 had tillers. They didn't even have a steering wheel. They had no sides. They had no roof. They had no windshield. They had a 7-horsepower gasoline engine, one-cycle engine. That's your lawnmower today. It's actually kind of a puny lawnmower today. Top speed of about 20 miles an hour and a small gas tank. They were really, barely removed from a horse-drawn carriage.
Yeah, they were really motorized carriages.
That's exactly what they were. They were motorized carriages.
And speaking of innovation, there's also examples, steam-powered cars, electricity-powered cars.
Steam and electric and gas were all at that time competing pretty much on a level playing field. Because there were many electric companies, there were many steam companies, and of course there were many gas-powered companies. The problem with electric cars is similar to the problem that we're still having, although solving to a much greater degree today, which was battery life. Yeah. You didn't get a charge big enough to take you that far. Once you get outside of major cities, you couldn't recharge the thing. So that the electric car eventually went away. It mostly went away. Steam cars had disadvantages and advantages. They had power, they had speed. Yeah. Some of the early steam manufacturers produced a wonderfully looking automobile. The drawback was, to get the thing going, you had to fire it up, you had to get the steam coming up, and that took away. Imagine your car in the morning, you've got to wait 20 minutes to actually start it before you can move it. The other problem was they blew up.
That.
Not a good marketing strategy. It's like, well, hopefully your car won't blow up. So steam fell by the wayside and never will come back, unlike the electrics.
Yeah. Did you had to do some traveling, I'm sure, to do the research for this? What were the types of places that you visited? What were the archival resources like for a book like this?
Well, I spent time, a fair amount of time in Detroit at the Detroit Public Library, which has one of the great automobile history collections in the world. It may be the largest, I'm not sure. I spent a lot of time at the Henry Ford. It's a museum and archives in Dearborn, where Ford is still headquartered to this day. A great museum, great archives. Spent a lot of time going through records there. I went to Michigan State University. I went up to the Worcester Public Library in the early stages of this book, where they also have a fairly strong auto history collection. Between the time I started writing this book, because I wrote in sort of fits and starts, started a number of years ago, and when I finished it, Google Books came along. And I have to tell you, as a researcher and someone who delves into history, Google Books is a godsend. They have, for example, digitized most of, and probably all of, the early automobile trade industry publications. The Automobile, the Motor World, the Cycle World, all these publications. And it's not easy going through Google Books. We have this perception that, you just Google the search term and it will come up.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way in Google Books, but it's a lot easier than going to the MIT library, which has a collection, and then back to up to the Boston Public Library, or back to Detroit a second time. So that was a godsend to me. I was also helped online and through communication, telephone, and email by the American Automobile Club of America and a number of other auto historical museums and societies. People were very helpful in this. They love sharing their stories. Of course, who doesn't love sharing a story?
People love cars, and
people love cars.
And
yep.
You and I have talked in other settings about the impact on American society that this invention and this new industry would ultimately have. It's pervasive. It is from public morals to public investments, and frankly, at this point now, even climate change.
Yes, and that was evident early on. The birth of the car was a traumatic event, really, for the country and for other parts of the world, notably Europe, where the roots of the car predate actually the American industry. But in terms of culture and society, it was clear from the beginning that this was a game changer, that this was in many fundamental ways going to profoundly change the culture of society. Obviously was going to, or did, create an enormous business with a lot of secondary businesses. But the cultural and social changes I found very interesting. And there were a lot of battles between, sort of I call them the horse-bound traditionalists, who saw this new machine as evil and just a change in their lives that they didn't want. There were battles on the streets of New York between people who resented or got angry at the fact that a lot of the early drivers, none of whom needed a license or registration or driver's ed or anything, would hit people and then just drive on, leaving them often to die in the roads. And one reaction to that was stonings. And I find that amusing in sort of a dark way. The New York Times, in the era that I'm writing about, the early 1900s, had a number of page-one stories where mobs of mostly young and older men, but some women as well, would see a car coming along, and it might have been somebody or a car that had been involved in a hit-and-run accident. It might not have been. There was class envy here, too. It might have been a Vanderbilt driving in a fancy import, and they would find stones and rocks and sticks and metal tea kettles and whatever they could and stone these people. And it was page one news. There were battles in legislatures over taxation, over registration, over requiring titles and getting driver's licenses. But the most profound change was, in just a few years, this strange new machine, the evil automobile, as some people call it, became almost a necessity of life for a lot of people. I mean, much as the computer has, and the later iteration of devices, and now smartphones and tablets and whatever.
You talk about the book is up to sort of the advent of the Model T, which Henry Ford famously imagined as, at least the myth tells us that he imagined as a car for every for every person.
And it wasn't a myth. That was exactly his vision.
But when the car was initially developed, when the industry was in its infancy, really, I mean, literally, when it was still being born, who was the market? Who were they building these contraptions for?
Well, they were building it for a lot of different people. I mean,
was it the people on Bellevue Avenue? Was it that crowd, or was it conceived initially for the folks who were going to buy these in huge numbers?
The roots go back to Germany and particularly to France. The French were the earliest pioneers of the automobile. They saw the market as just everyday people. But there's people who would want another way to get around that wasn't the horse, that was perhaps more reliable or potentially more reliable than a horse, that could be faster than a horse. So they appealed to that sense of, sort of individual freedom. We want to be able to move, travel. Speed was a big element. There also was, of course, an appeal to the upper class. What you're talking about, the Gilded Age set here in Newport, Rhode Island, who would see this as much as they would, their summer mansion, another sign of their wealth and their affluence and their upper class status. And so there was a market for the luxury automobile that was much different than the Henry Ford Model T. He never made a car like that. Right. But there were lots of imports in American cars that they were beautiful looking things. Yeah. And if you were just some poor proletarian person in New York, you could see where you might want to stone it.
We did your book launch here a month ago.
Yes, great fun.
With several just really incredible examples from that early era of the automobile industry, from Audrain and from the personal collection of Ambassador Middendorf. Just beautiful, beautiful cars. I know that you have some social media posts of yourself enjoying those rides. Is there one car more than another from this era that just sort of spoke to you, the way only a car can speak to us?
I have to say, well, there were two. The Model T, only because the Model T has been something we've all known about,
and because you're a man of the people.
Exactly. Right. I was not the fancy imported Daimlers and Benzes. No go. The Packard. I kind of like the Packard, but the one that was most dear to my heart was the 1904 Curved Dash Oldsmobile, the one that raced in 1905.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I spent so much time writing about that particular automobile. There are enthusiasts who restore these. I got a technical catalog. I almost felt like I could build one of these myself. Wow. But I had never seen one. And the thought of actually getting one here for the launch party, that I know I'm sounding like a kid, my 16-and-a-half-year-old self driving my first car, my 1953 Ford sedan, my mother's car. The thought of actually seeing one was incredible. And when we found out that Audrain, God bless them, had one in their collection, they shipped it up from Virginia, brought it here. Not only brought it here, but as you said, they ran it. They let us ride in it. I got to sit in it with my daughters, my granddaughters, my wife. That's my car.
They're so incredible.
I want that car, and I want that car.
You mentioned your first car. Was your first car your favorite car? In terms of your own personal experience with cars, not just the cars you write about.
Good question. My personal favorite car is my Toyota Camry right now. I have to say, because sitting in that thing, I've often imagined what it would be like if Henry Ford could come back and sit in, a Fusion, for example, which is kind of, the Ford equivalent to the Camry, the midsize sedan, with all of its instrumentation, all of its software, its incredible engine, its reliability. I mean, these cars go 200,000 miles. So that's my favorite car. But my sentimental favorite car was that 1953 Ford, and it came to a very sad end, unfortunately.
Were you responsible for it?
I wasn't. I went off to college. I went off to Harvard. I let a good friend of mine, who was known to be a crazy human being, borrow this car. And the car was actually my mother's, and I'll make this long story short. Even though I called it my car, she let me drive it, so it was my car. But it was registered in her name. She got a call when I was away in Cambridge from the Gloucester, Massachusetts Police Department. They had fished a 1953 Ford sedan out of a quarry, an old quarry, and it was registered to her. And did she know anything about this? And it turns out that my crazy friend, he gave some, cockamamie story about, well, it just kind of rolled off the cliff. And knowing Dave, and I won't give his last name, I know what Dave did. He revved that thing up, he jumped up and threw her over the cliff.
Oh, wow. I'm sorry, but my condolences.
Now I'm like close to tears. Not really. But I love that car. We had 3 on the tree, and it was great fun to do donuts and get out in the snow and do, figure 8s and all kinds of stuff.
So from my own personal experience too, this relationship that we have with cars, it's a personal relationship.
It really is.
And there are cars. There was a car that I had a few years ago that I know I didn't get a good deal from the salesman, because when I walked onto the lot and I saw it for the first time, I couldn't stop smiling. Why do these cars? Why do cars speak to us this way?
It depends on who you are. I mean, I think sort of the baseline is it's freedom. It's the freedom to go where you want, when you want, on your own terms, relatively on your own terms. You should stay on a road, although
under the speed limit.
And under the speed limit, although who does that? That's the baseline. And then you get off into a whole lot of, sort of subgenres, if you will. People who like speed, people who like beauty. I mean, a lot of cars that have been made over the years and still made are beautiful things. I mean, visually, they're just beautiful to look at. For some people, it's just reliable transportation. For some people, it's an extension of their personality. Or people who drive VW Bugs are different from people who drive, for example, a Mercedes-Benz.
Absolutely, and I think that for a lot of people too, it also reflects something of accomplishment, and where you are in your life, and what you've achieved or not, and they're incredibly personal things. So the book has been out now for about a month.
About a month, yeah.
It is coincidentally timed for the holiday season. It's a wonderful Christmas gift.
Thank you.
And it's a wonderful book. And they can buy it at Amazon. They can buy it at local bookstores. It's
independent
all over,
stores. Right? Yeah, there's a website, carcrazybook.com, where you can get information on buying it. It's been named, actually, Vox.com named it as one of their holiday gift guide books. So yeah, you can get it anywhere, and come visit us on the site or follow us on Twitter or whatever you want to do.
Carcrazybook.com.
Carcrazybook.com.
Outstanding. G. Wayne Miller, the book is Car Crazy. It's a wonderful read, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jim. Very kind of you. See you in your car.